So today marks the second in our Bible study series on the character of Joseph, the 11th son of the great patriarch Jacob, whose story is told in the final chapters of the book of Genesis. Now, Joseph is often referred to as the dreamer because he is a man who's been gifted with this peculiar vision, a peculiar insight from God. But Joseph's dreams get him into a considerable amount of trouble. He has, for example, two dreams about his family members bowing down to him. Now, naturally, these dreams are threatening to the family, and they're particularly threatening to Joseph's older brothers who don't want to bow down to him ever. So in order to deal with the threat that those dreams represent, the brothers feel that they need to deal with Joseph. And that brings us to today's reading from the book of Genesis, Genesis 37, verses 12 to 24, and here we see the brothers of Joseph dealing with him. One more thing by way of introduction. If you found this Bible study helpful in your walk of faith, please leave a like. And if you would like more sermons, more services, and more Bible studies from Stone Church, please subscribe. So, with that out of the way, let's get started. So we're looking at Genesis chapter 37, 12, all the way up to, let me just see here, 24. It says, "Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, 'Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them.' Joseph answered, 'Here I am.' So Israel said to him, 'Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me.' So he sent him from the valley of Hebron." I think it's really telling that whereas his brothers are out working, they're out pasturing the flock, Joseph is at home with his dad. And I almost get the impression when I read it that that's the norm for the family. So Joseph, being the favorite son, is at home, he's by his father's side. And I don't know about you, but as I read that story, I don't get the impression that Jacob considers his son to be somehow lazy for not going out to work with the flocks, right? Joseph isn't scolded, he isn't rebuked, he's not told by his dad, "Look, why don't you get out there and do some work for a change," right? Instead, Jacob just kind of gently suggests to Joseph, it seems, "Look, go check up on your brothers." And then it seems like Jacob specifically sends Joseph out to actually report on his brothers, like almost as if Joseph were the foreman and the rest of his brothers, his older brothers, are the laborers, right? So, obedient to his father's will, Joseph makes his way to this place called Shechem, where his brothers happen to be pasturing the flock. Now, right now, Jacob happens to be near the Hebron Valley, and in order for Joseph to get from Hebron to Shechem, he's got a journey of about 50 miles. So this is quite a hike for him. He probably takes him, maybe 2 days to hike the 50 miles. He's probably got to stop overnight and rest. So finally he approaches Shechem, and his brothers see him. So we'll read on and find out what happens next. So now we're at 37 verses 18 to 20. "They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, 'Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams.'" And I think here you really clearly see just how much animosity Joseph's brothers harbor towards him, right? Because immediately when they see him off in the distance, they start to plot his murder. And I kind of think that maybe at first it was a joke, right? Maybe one of the brothers, because they're just so frustrated with the kid, right? One of the brothers makes this black joke like, "Oh, why don't we just kill him," right? But what started as a joke eventually turns into this full-blown plot to kill their brother, maybe as they sit and they ruminate about it and talk more and more. So what motivates the murder plot? Well, two things. I think this is pretty obvious. Number one, there's that sense of jealousy. So why does Israel, why does Jacob, why does Dad love this kid more than he loves the rest of us? But also, I think there's a fear that Joseph's dream is going to come true. So remember, people took stock in dreams at the time, I think as we should now. And there was this thought that, okay, maybe this whole dream of sun, moon, and stars bowing down to Joseph, this whole idea of us, the elder brothers, bowing down to Joseph, maybe that'll come true. And if so, that's a real threat to us. So they plot to take his life, and listen to what they say. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." So I think the implication here is, if we kill the dreamer, then we kill the dream. That's really important. If we kill the dreamer, then we kill the dream. We neutralize this threat that he poses to us as a family. And they decide to go ahead with their plan. They decide to kill him. This is a pretty good place to commit a murder, actually. You're out in the middle of nowhere. So all they have to do is kill Joseph, hide the body, and there are plenty of places to hide the body. There are all these empty wells in the region. And then they have to formulate a realistic explanation for his death. Oh, he was eaten by a wild animal. That's very plausible. But in the end, they don't actually go through with that plan, thanks to Reuben. So we'll continue on, Genesis 37, 21 to 24. "But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, 'Let's not take his life.' Reuben said to them, 'Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father.' So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it." So who's Reuben? Reuben is the oldest son in the family. He is the first child that Jacob has through Leah. And as the oldest boy, not only is he more mature, but I think ultimately he has a greater sense of responsibility in the family. Now, I think he still has that same animosity towards Joseph as the other brothers do, but I don't think as the eldest son he can afford to go ahead and be reckless. As much as he wants to see Joseph receive his comeuppance, he has to be the responsible one. He has to be that sober second thought. And so what Reuben does in his maturity and responsibility is creates a plan of his own. He suggests that they throw Jacob down one of the many empty wells or cisterns that happen to be in that area. A quick side note here. The cisterns mentioned in this passage were pits that were dug in the area, and they were lined with some kind of plaster, right? And the idea was that during the rainy season, those cisterns would collect water, and in the dry season, the water would actually remain in the cisterns, so people could still go to that area and water their flocks, etc. And it wasn't unusual, though, for some of these cisterns to be completely dry at certain points of the year. So what they do, at any rate, is throw Joseph down one of these dry cisterns. And what Reuben is doing by suggesting this is he is trying to satisfy the anger of his brothers without doing anything too drastic to Joseph. And this is what I think is going through his head. This is probably his internal dialogue. He's thinking, look, I'll encourage my brothers to throw Joseph down the well, and we'll let him yell for a bit. We'll let him cry down there for a bit. And after a couple of hours, I'll haul the kid out myself. And that, number one, should teach the brat to not, kind of lord his dreams over us. But two, it'll also satisfy the anger of my brothers without really doing any serious harm to my little brother. So again, Reuben, the oldest brother, is trying to do the responsible thing. And in the end, the brothers go along with Reuben's suggestion. They take Joseph, they throw him down into the cistern, but first, what do? Do you remember what?
They take his coat, clothes.
Exactly, because that coat, that cloak he's wearing, symbolizes everything they hate about him. So they take this long-sleeved garment off that was a symbol of their father's special affection towards him, and then they throw him into the cistern. And so now we're going to read about what happens next. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. Okay, it says that they sat down to eat. They sat down to eat, they being the brothers, but not all of the brothers. Joseph, of course, is in the well, so he's not there. And the eldest brother, Reuben, isn't there either. And it's not exactly explained why he isn't present. My guess is that he's preoccupied. Maybe he's the one who's watching over the herds while the rest of the brothers get lunch. At any rate, it's while Joseph is in the well that the 9 brothers, without the sober second thought of Reuben, manage to hatch a plan of their own. And it's specifically Judah who hatches the plan. And this is what he proposes. He proposes that instead of killing Joseph, or instead of simply letting him die at the bottom of this well, they can instead sell him to the Ishmaelites. And that would accomplish 2 things. Number 1, it would get rid of the dreamer and the dream without forcing them to commit fratricide, because they don't want to actually kill the brother. But 2, it would also allow them to make a bit of a financial profit. Because remember what Judah asks. He says, "What profit is it if we kill our brother?" And the implication there is, look, if we sell him into slavery, then at least we get some money from it. And that's exactly what they do. They sell him to their distant cousins, the Ishmaelites. It says in verse 28, "When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt." Apparently, I've read in this time period, slaves typically went for 20 shekels each, so 20 pieces of silver. I personally have never tried to buy an ancient slave myself, but this is what I've read in the commentaries. And that would have been approximately 2 years' wages for a common shepherd, which sounds like a lot, okay? But bear in mind that Jacob's family is fairly well off, right? Jacob has a large family, many, many flocks, so these are like trust fund kids. And also consider the fact that they have to now divide the profit 10 ways. So in the end, there's actually not much profit to be gained by killing Joseph, by selling Joseph into slavery, rather. But at the very least, in their minds at least, they managed to, again, get rid of the dreamer and get rid of the dream, which is what they want the most. That dream is a threat to them. I'll keep going here, verses 29 to 32, chapter 37. "When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, 'The boy is gone, and where can I turn?' Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They had the long robe with sleeves taken to their father, and they said, 'This we have found. See now whether it is your son's robe or not.'" So, Reuben comes back from wherever it is he was. He notices that Joseph is no longer in the cistern. Naturally, he's in tremendous distress. He tears his garment, which is the ancient form of grieving. And after all, he, being the oldest brother, he's the one who's going to have to go home and tell the old man the bad news. He's the one that Jacob is going to view as being responsible for the death of Joseph. So together, Reuben, working with the other brothers, they come up with a plan. And here's what the plan is. They're going to take Joseph's coat, cover it in goat's blood, take it back to the father, and the father can't run a DNA test on the blood or anything like that, right? So he's going to naturally conclude that he was torn to death by a wild animal. So basically, the brothers agree to engage in a murder cover-up. Now, interestingly enough, of course, the brothers haven't killed Joseph, literally, but they have, by getting rid of him, by selling him into slavery, in a sense, murdered him in their hearts. They murdered him in their hearts. And, this reminds me of what Jesus taught about murder in the Sermon on the Mount. The suggestion there is that murder needn't be a literal act. Okay? At any rate, the story ends on a very dark note. Jacob sees that the long-sleeved coat is dripping with blood, and we're told, and I quote, that he recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." And thus his father bewailed him. Basically, the story ends on Good Friday, if you will, right? Joseph, practically speaking, is dead. As far as his father is concerned, the boy is dead. In a sense, as far as the brothers are concerned, the boy is dead because they've managed to get, they managed to get rid of him, right? And with the death of Joseph comes the death of the dream. And there's nothing left to do at this point but weep and mourn. And all the efforts to comfort the old man in his grief just fall flat because, like any parent who's lost a child, he's devastated. And there's no possible way for him to be comforted. It's going to take a long time for him to experience any measure of healing. So last week I said that Joseph, in a way, foreshadows Christ. He's like a type of Christ. And I explained all this last week. Joseph is last in the family because he's lowest in the pecking order. As somebody just rightfully pointed out a few minutes ago, he's the 11th born son. But he's also first because he's the favorite of his father. Kind of like Jesus. Jesus is last because he is servant of all, but he's also the first because he reigns forever at the right hand of God. Jesus is Alpha and Omega, beginning and end, first and last. And just as Joseph has this vision of his brothers bowing down to him, so too does the New Testament present us with this vision of all of humanity bowing down to Jesus. And Revelation, for example, presents us with this glorious dream of the whole human family bowing down to Jesus the Lamb. It says, Revelation 7, 9-11, "After this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne of God and before the Lamb, robed in white with palm branches in their hands. And all the angels stood around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped." And St. Paul also remarks that the day will come when, at the name of Jesus, every knee should bend in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess Christ Jesus to be Lord. Now, this is the problem. Just as the sons of Israel fear the dreams of Joseph, I think the human family fears this idea of the Messiah's reign. We fear this idea of Christ's reign. And I think the reason for that is, just like Joseph's brothers, we don't want to bow down as human beings. As members of a fallen race, as members of a broken people, I think we want to be little gods unto ourselves. And we bow to no one, right? Except for ourselves and our own will. I'm not going to cede my will to another person. I want to follow my passions. I want to live my authentic self. These are the words, these phrases that you hear quite often today in our culture, right? The dream of the Messiah's reign, I think, is also a threat to powerful people. It's a threat to people who want political authority. It's a threat to people who want their, political party, for example, or their political philosophy to take precedence over all things, right? So to those who want absolute power, the person who calls himself King of Kings and Lord of Lords is a threat. It's a huge threat, to say the very least. And so what do we do as human beings? Well, because we're threatened by the dream, we try to kill the dreamer. Okay, we crucify the Lord of glory. And when the Lord is crucified, those who actually do believe in the dream and welcome the dream and want the dream to be realized, they're in a place of mourning. So again, think of the disciples on Good Friday, right? Just as Jacob mourns in this story, refusing to be comforted, we see the disciples, we see the mother of our Lord in a place of tremendous grief when Jesus is killed. But thankfully, the story of Jesus doesn't end with Good Friday. It doesn't end with the crucifixion. And thankfully, the story of Joseph doesn't end with Jacob's grief. Because, of course, there's a future for Joseph in Egypt. And because there's a future for Joseph in Egypt, there is a future for the rest of Israel. Israel will be saved because ultimately Joseph is sent off into Egypt. And we'll see why in future Bible studies.